Hi, I'm Jim Clark, Visual Arts Manager here at Hopkins Center for the Arts. We're speaking with Dennis Kalow about his exhibition, Unexpected Ends. He's showing with Kathy Snow Stratton, painter. Dennis is a sculptor. Dennis, welcome.
Thank you, and thank you for coming.
Yeah. What can you tell us about this particular body of work on display?
Well, I just got a brief comment from one of our guests about diversity, and I tend to lean in that direction, even though I'm not always encouraged to do that. I find galleries often want a series of something, or want me to stay in a pretty narrow path.
Sure.
And I just think I'm kind of too old to do that anymore. I know a couple of local sculptors who are all over the map, and I have just thought, I really like that. I usually have 2 or 3 pieces going at once.
Sure.
And I never know which one I'm going to work on when I show up for the day. Nor do I know where they're going. Unexpected ends. But I like being able to squirt out in a lot of directions, so I do.
You prize the freedom to pursue whatever comes to mind.
For sure, absolutely.
I did myself also note, along with Diane, how there's a great variety in the work. There's also unity. Maybe not the unity that some gallerists are requesting, as far as, because it helps drive sales, right?
Oh,
they
absolutely.
This is Dennis's deal.
That's
right?
the deal, for sure.
But there is a through thread of unity in your approach to contrasting textures. And there's a lot of forms that, while they're not serially iterated, there is a subtle repetition, I think. Is that something that you strive for at any level, or is it just a natural, the natural output of being from the same person?
Yeah, I think that's the case.
Yeah.
I don't think I ever think about let's evolve from that form. If I find any given piece interesting, I'm just interested in it for that piece. And I don't think that I've, a couple of exceptions, but rarely think about let's follow this up with something else. I just don't tend to think that way. Everyone is pretty much its own individual piece. Sometimes that'll depend upon media. If I happen to have, for example, I grabbed a bunch of rusted fence out of a Mexican desert.
Yes.
And I liked the way what used to be parallel was not parallel anymore. It was twisted and bent and rusted. So that sort of appealed to me.
Sure.
But it wasn't enough in itself, so I had to build on that. But I had a lot of that stuff. So that became 2 or 3 pieces, which I guess have some commonality, but that's a rare thing.
Related to material, and I do want to come back to the series, no series idea, but how much of your material choice is driven by an idea versus you've discovered a material like that one, and then it inspires an idea? Do you have the idea first, and then you seek out the material or the medium to make that idea whole and physical, or what proportion is it?
I think both. There's a piece here, it's in the showcase out front, that has some cement in it. I've only used cement in 2 pieces, but I liked that contrast. It was for me, an interesting contrast to a really high gloss enamel. I don't know where I had seen that. I've worked with cement and countertops and things, and the challenge of that was interesting for me. But I don't think it started with that. Things sometimes start with a texture, though. I'll see a texture somewhere, or even a color combination, and I'll just take a photo note of it, and it'll work its way into a piece.
Through daily life.
Oh, yeah.
You'll encounter something on a walk.
It could be nothing.
Yeah.
I was just over at Mocha Coffee, and I was looking at color relationships, and that won't go anywhere, but I could. I've certainly had that happen in the past. I think I read a quote from the Coen brothers, Joel Coen, recently, and he said that he started a movie based on a title. He didn't know anything about where this movie was going. He had a title in his head, and it became a movie. That happens to me all the time. I'm sure it does.
Really?
Oh, yeah. And not necessarily a title. I've done it with a title.
Yeah.
But it can be anything. I mean, I saw a blop of malted milk on the floor of a McDonald's once and took a picture of it. I had a lot of people looking at me. But that became a lot of, I don't think that's unusual. I think artists would say that all the time.
All the time, yeah.
That became a bunch of drawings, and so far they haven't ended up any further than that, but they might. I flipped through years of sketch pads when I need something. And
it's a badge of honor, right? People look at you weird, you go, I'm an artist, right? Sue me. Could you spill something?
It excuses a lot of behavior.
For sure. You said it inspired a lot of drawing. So process-wise, do these works evolve through preparatory drawings? Do you ever do study models or maquettes, proof of concept kind of things? And you're working in a lot of different mediums, so I wonder if you have to do some proof of concept as far as how those materials will work together chemically, for that matter.
Sure. Always drawing. I mean, I don't think I've ever started a piece that didn't start as a drawing. It's pretty rare that a piece will even be identifiable from a drawing. If you were to flip through my sketch pad, you'd see that piece back there, that black Continental Divide piece, almost exactly the way I drew it, but that's really unusual. That's really unusual. This piece, when it started as a shape, who knows where that shape came from? I didn't intend it to be juxtaposed to another shape. I didn't have any intention of that hole going through there, kind of unifying those two pieces. So that's all part of the process. I mean, I'm sure Kathy would say that as well. You're never sure where things are going. You're always worried about second-guessing yourself. David Byrne, Talking Heads music, said sometimes you just have to trust the process, and you just go with it. And surprisingly, more often than not, you've got something when you're done.
How did you arrive at your process? I mean, has it always looked like this for as long as you've been an artist?
I would say no. My kids would say yes.
Oh, really?
I was absolutely astounded. The first piece of sculpture, I just decided to quit real-life career about 7 years ago because I had a lot of drawing and I wasn't getting any of it done. I was occupied paying the rent and that stuff. And I thought, I got to quit this and just focus on sculpture. So the first piece that I did, I thought I was just exploring some new territory. My daughter looked at it and she said, oh yeah, I can tell that's yours. It just amazed me. But it goes back to your question from a bit ago. I think we sort of have this thing in our heads that, I mean, I can tell you're drawing. I look on Instagram, I know when I've gotten to you. I don't have to see your name down in the bottom. And I think that's true with sculpture too. Sometimes I don't like that. I wish I was a little freer to just completely depart from something, but I'm kind of liking what I'm doing, so.
Yeah. That's an interesting place to be, that you like what you're doing, but at the same time, there's a nagging desire to do something that you wouldn't recognize as your own? Is that?
Yeah, I can hardly imagine that.
Yeah.
But but I like that notion of that. It would be interesting to do that. I have an artist friend, we're in Mexico a lot. I have an artist friend who's been doing semi-realistic painting, selling everything she makes to tourists, and she just got tired of it, which I think is, we all kind of do if we stay in the same mold for too long. And she completely, to the point where you would never ever recognize this as Donna's work. And she ended up doing both for a while. And I don't know whether she was fulfilled by that move or not, but she had to do it for some reason. I haven't gotten to that point. I don't think of there being a lot of commonality in my work, but there's enough, I think, that people generally know, oh yeah, that's more of your stuff.
I kind of know the answer to this, but have you always been a sculptor?
No, oh gosh, no. It was one of my least favorite classes in college. I was just talking, I had a friend come here to the opening the other night, and he was reminding me of the sculptor teacher we used to have. And I wish I could talk to that guy again.
You could say his name. I'm just kidding.
Paul Hopkins. He's been dead for years. But a really interesting guy who didn't like my work much, and I would like to spend some more time with him. He was a successful sculptor, and but no, we were potters, my wife and I, for 20 years. Well, I was teaching during that time, but it was a nice summer occupation, and we did the Uptown and Madison and Duluth and all the fair circuits. And you might say, well, there's certainly a continuity between pottery forms and sculpture, but there's a lot of freedom with sculpture that you don't have with pots, I think. Generally, people need to have a function. We used to laugh because we'd build something and no one would buy it unless we put down at the bottom, holds toothpicks, and then, oh yeah, I'll take it. Give me that. Do you have any more? That function seemed to be necessary. I don't ever think about function with these. Once in a while, I'll design pieces and they're pot-like. And I have to scrap that and do something else with it.
You also painted, did you not?
Oh, I painted. I was never a good painter. I wish I had the skills of a Kathy or a lot of other painters I know. I have been interested lately, we were just talking about this a bit ago, doing more painting on sculpture rather than just a uniform color. I've only done that twice, and one of those pieces just sold, or it would have been in this show, where I've done some color gradations or texture gradations. I'm interested in that, and I mean, I've done it. It's not like I haven't done it. And I'd like to play around with that a little more. You know, I think about like a Klimt. There's just a ton of possibilities there with sculpture, I think, for those kind of surfaces that he created. And I look at that and I think, oh gosh, I could use that. Be kind of neat. So hopefully a year from now, we'll see more of that.
Currently, how do you approach applying color to your sculptures? Do you have a set application? Are you spraying? I
spray a lot. When I first started this, I really wanted to work on just enameled surfaces. And that's a little more complicated than one would think.
How so?
It's just technically difficult to, for me at least it was, to spray a complex form with an uniform enameled surface. Spray is not all that easy, but
without dripping, without overspray.
Yeah, you know, you get all that stuff. And also, it limits my color choices a lot, especially if I'm using spray cans. So the last, on these pieces, there's a lot of color in there, and there was color that I couldn't get from spray cans. So I just thought, I can brush this stuff, and I rather liked the way that worked out. And with color, I can mix really subtle changes. I mean, I don't need 15 colors. I can get by with 2 or 3. I know enough about mixing color to make that work. So I think I'm going to be doing more of that in the near future. This too, this is all, well, that's not true. Parts of those are sprayed, but anyway.
The multiple elements with the different colors, are they painted individually and then assembled?
Yeah, on both sides, which was a pain.
Yeah.
But I sort of laid this out as a paper collage, which is easy. You know, you can slide things around. I could do that on the computer too, but it takes me less time to snip paper and that sort of thing.
Isn't that wonderful?
Oh, yeah.
Because everybody, I think the knee-jerk reaction or assumption is, oh, the computer, I can do all this stuff faster.
Yeah, you got to draw it all first, though. And if it was my son, it'd be faster, but it's not me. Takes me a while to do that.
Do you often have to invent new connection schemes, for instance, with the different elements of your sculpture, in between different objects within a sculpture, but also different materials?
Talking about physical connection?
Yeah, physical connection.
Oh, yeah.
The nuts and bolts, quite literally, of sculpting in this mode.
Yes, that's fun. I like to look at these as little engineering problems. And how is this going to work? Or how I'm, like the piece with the cement out in the showcase, that's a tricky balancing act. There's a mass of cement and a big form on top of it that's sitting on a little piece like this. So you have to figure out, how am I going to do that? And also, if somebody buys this, I don't want it falling apart in a month. I mean, I think a little bit about longevity. I want things to last, whether people want them to last or not. But that, I like that problem. Sure. So it's nuts and bolts is right. I mean, you can screw things tight. You can epoxy. I use a lot. This piece has dowels connecting 2 sections. I also try to make pieces that I can take apart again. Maybe that's dumb, but if you buy a piece of mine and it falls off the table, I would like to have you call and say, can you do anything with this? And if I have cemented everything together in such a way that I can't disassemble it and fix a piece, I don't like that thought. I like to be able to take things apart, or if I don't often ship pieces, but I've had pieces that I've shipped and I have to send them in parts. So that's kind of interesting to think about. How's this all going to fit together? A puzzle sort of. I kind of like that.
Your artist statement leans into the formal aspects of the work, and I wonder if any part of your process or mental energies is invested in a sense of narrative, because the titles oftentimes suggest something. So I guess I don't entirely take your statement at face value. They're clearly
you're
formally
doubting me, is what you're saying?
Yeah, maybe a little bit. There's a pervasive sense of whimsy, I think, through color choice and form, but there's also a bite to it. I mean, there's whimsy with bite. For instance, Most of Us Died. And that one is a bit more austere in its presentation. Yeah. And maybe feels a bit more serious, but at the same time, there's almost a wink there in that, I mean, we're all gonna
Yeah,
right?
that isn't, there's no wink there. That's pretty serious.
Yeah.
It's about a concentration camp visit I had last summer. So
Okay.
there isn't much whimsy in that one.
Okay. I didn't realize that at all.
No, and I, not to guess your question, but I think where you're going with that is, does it ever start with that? In that case, it actually did start with that. That was a moving experience, and I happened to be listening. It was at Buchenwald, it's a concentration camp in Germany, and you can listen to statements of survivors on audio and watch. It was an amazing thing. And this one guy said, you know, you hear from people like me about what this was like or how I survived this or that, but he said, you know, when it boils right down to it, most of us died. And it just kind of, even now saying it, it just sort of makes me cringe because it's so true. And so what we're looking at are a pile of bone-like shapes with a few little survivors sprinkled around. But they're not bones. They're just bone-like reference. For me, I couldn't have done bones.
Sure.
Like, here's a couple of femurs and here's
With anatomical accuracy.
No, that would have...
You're being poetic.
I hope so. But yeah, that doesn't interest me at all. And I often have to fight that. Something will come up and it'll look a little like a face. Oh, I don't want to do that. This piece is called When Kenny Came Home. And I've had people look at that and think, what the heck are you talking about? It was a play that I saw at Jungle Theater, and it was about a tiny little town, I think it was in North Dakota, tiny little town where this guy left and went to the big city. Just this hotshot playboy, made a lot of money, came back with this amazingly gaudy sport coat, and came back to town and just looked like an absolute fool. He came back to impress all his old classmates, mom and dad and uncles. He looked like an idiot. And that play I really liked, and that was the source of that piece. Now, doesn't look like a sport coat, I guess. Doesn't have arms, it doesn't have buttons, but it sort of looks like a sport coat. It sort of looks like somebody, you know.
With an attitude.
Yeah, with an attitude, exactly. So there's some distance there between that person and that sculpture, but I like that distance. I kind of work hard to maintain that distance. Whereas, gosh, I went to a portrait show down at Deb Zeller's a bit ago. I had some really interesting conversations with people who work hard not to create that distance. I mean, if that portrait isn't you, I've screwed something up. So it's just a different thing.
Bubblegum Garden. I mean, that's... do each of these works have that story behind them, essentially? A story like that? Like, you could say, this is when I was
You're
inspired
pinning
to
me down,
this.
aren't you?
Well, I'm just curious.
Yeah.
And,
I know, I'd like
not
to...
that you have to share them all. And in fact, I would imagine...
No, let's share them all. I've got plenty of
there are a lot of short stories. Yeah.
Almost all do.
Are they better when they do?
I don't know. I don't encourage that, but people who have come to shows of mine encourage that. Certainly people who buy something want to know where that came from. And I've actually got into the habit sometimes of doing a photo of the sketch that a piece came from and sending it to someone who bought something.
Sure.
Yeah, I guess most things have a bit of a story, but I mean, art comes from our experience, so how could it not? I mean, usually something gets that off the ground. Not always, but usually. This piece, there's no story to that. It just started with me doodling. and a few more doodles, and then that kind of got to a point where I thought, oh yeah, I think I can start this. And then from there it grew into something else. I didn't know what color that base was going to be until the day I painted it, because I wasn't liking whatever else I had. So you just need to trust those impulses and go with it.
Do you get a jolt of excitement from, I mean, that's maybe almost as dangerous as it gets for us as practicing artists. Like, well, I'm not sure what color that's going to be until the day, you know. Do you need that?
That,
an uncertainty till that last commitment.
I don't know whether I need it. I don't always like it. I'm not always sure. Maybe all artists experience that, not being sure where to go with something. Back to the burn comment, sometimes you just need to trust yourself and go with it. And really, in the end, I almost feel more sorry for painters, especially painters who are into the ink wash business. You can't screw anything up. You either do it right or it's garbage. I've got a little more play space. I mean, if I paint, I've done pieces that I've painted 3 different colors before I've decided that, yeah, this is a good one. And obviously my head thought the other ones were good too, but they weren't when I started, so.
It's easy to imagine something is going to work out until you see it, and then it rubs up against the reality of that. How often do you have to repaint something like that?
Not very often.
Really? So normally your pre-visualization is pretty in line with what ends up being real.
Yeah, I'm just looking around here. I guess usually.
Yeah.
I've got a piece in my studio right now that I'm fighting with a little bit, and I'm grabbing a bunch of color swatches, and I think I know where I'm going with it, but I could be screwing it up.
It sounded like for when Kenny comes home, you essentially, did you have the color scheme that you were going to apply to the form? You didn't. You created the form and then decided on what color to paint it?
Well, I couldn't create the whole form because these are separate pieces.
Okay.
All of those, this was sprayed, so that couldn't even be attached until it was painted. So I had to know that much, and actually that would be a real tough piece to undo because of the way I painted it. I like that crisp edge on some pieces, and that's the best way to do it. Or here, that's the best way to do it. So sometimes that plays out that way.
This process of being free from object to object to pursue a thing without serial iteration, is it a response to your ceramic practice in that it didn't, you couldn't have that in that creative endeavor?
Ceramic being much more limited.
Well, and that's basically an assumption in that I haven't seen your ceramic work, so I'm making an educated guess.
The part of ceramic work that I found frustrating, and I think every potter could tell you this, is that the stuff that sells are the bowls and the casseroles and the coffee cups. So you start a season and you're looking at, okay, I need 6 dozen of these, and you just feel like a factory from day one. The pieces I really enjoyed were the pieces that were much more sculptural, most of which I still have. So, yeah, it's a nice break from that for sure. A nice break from that. Although I have a lot of sculptures too.
Who, can you name some artists that you have gained inspiration or influenced by? Like the jump to sculpture, was it simply, it came to you like a bolt from the blue, or had you been looking at sculpture and thinking, boy, I've got some ideas in that?
You know, Certainly like Jean Arp or Brancusi, I mean, they're pretty free forms. Sometimes there's a reference to a bird or something, but it's pretty distant, as much as Kenny is distant. I didn't have a specific artist that I wanted to build on. But
And maybe not even visually or an aesthetic, but an approach or a way of thinking about the art.
Maybe painters as much as anything. I spend a lot of time in Spain, and in Barcelona there's a big Miro gallery. I've never been a huge Miro fan till I went to that gallery. And he shoots in a lot of directions and does some amazing things with simplicity. And I like that idea of reducing things to a pretty simple image. I like to throw some surprises in.
For the viewer or for you, for both?
Both. Both. Yeah, I don't very often think, is somebody going to like this? Maybe it's part of some independence with being old and having enough money to pay the rent. I know it does. But it's real nice not to have to think, is anybody going to like this? I don't even think about that. Doesn't occur to me.
But along those lines, would you feel as satisfied if you just made these and kept them to yourself?
Oh, no. It's always great when somebody else. I don't remember, Kathy, if we had that conversation, but I always figure I'm taking a piece maybe 85% of the way. And it's fun, like at the opening the other night, people will come up and say, gosh, that reminds me of when I was 16 years old, and da-da-da-da. And that's great. That used to bother me. It was like, no, that isn't what I had in mind at all. But that was stupid. That was a piece of me I don't want around anymore.
When did the change happen?
I don't know. I don't remember.
Recently?
Well, when I first started, I mean, I've only been at this full time for maybe 8 years. So when I first started, I would do Art a Whirl and the Art Crawl in St. Paul, which is a pain for a sculptor because you're hauling all these bases and all this stuff. But the best part about that was hearing, you could sit there and listen to conversations, and somebody would come up and talk about Grandpa's farm or this or that. And I love that idea of somebody, I think we all do that with art. You read a poem, you hear some music, and I just heard a Billie Eilish interview the other night, and she said, I don't care if you're taking this where I'm taking it. I'd almost rather you take it where you take it, because you sort of dump it out there, and then somebody else grabs it, and in a sense, you're the end of that process. So that part I miss when nobody else gets it. You know, I just delivered a piece this afternoon, and it's kind of neat to know that this piece, in a sense, there's a little bit of loss because it was a big piece of me when I made it. So there's a tiny bit of regret, but it's really nice to see somebody else excited about a piece and having it in their house, and you know, that's neat. I like that.
Should we invite Kathy up?
Sure.
You sure?
Please.
Okay.
We need you.
Yeah.
Where do you want me? Over here?
Well, yeah. So you guys.
Over here.
There we are. This is Kathy.
Hi. Thanks
Kathy
for
Snow
coming.
Stratton, the painter on view in Unexpected Ends. And series-wise, I was curious about, you have a different approach to that. Like maybe completely polarized in that, Kathy, you set out and you have a fairly rigid structure of, I'm going to have 3 canvases, they're all going to relate in this way, and you pursue that. And Dennis, you're like, not going to have it.
No, but I sure loved talking to her about that.
Well,
I thought, whoa, that's a big contrast to what I do.
and what is it that you love about that idea?
That Kathy does it.
Full stop.
She's found so much success with that. And I can't speak for you, but maybe I'll just ask and take over Jim's place here for a second.
Please.
When you have a series, like as I was hanging some labels for you, it was series number 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Do you know where 5 is going when you start 1? Do you know where that whole package is going?
I usually do 3. So, and my process, I don't really think it's rigid, actually. No, but
go ahead and
just to
push back.
just to back up, because it's more like I stretch my own canvases. I have a plan, but it's way open-ended. And I was thinking about it today, like even in stretching my canvases, and you know, they're as big as me, and sometimes I feel like they're stronger than me, and I'm pulling them all directions and stapling, and you know, and it gets very physical. But at the same time, I'm thinking about where they're going to bring me, and what our relationship's going to be, because each painting, even though they're in a series of 3, each painting, they may be mildly connected, but each painting within a series brings me through a passage of understanding, and at the end, I feel like I'm just the instrument. Like so many times I feel like the brush is just creating itself, and when I get at the end, the meaning of that painting unexpectedly is illuminated for me. Like it comes from my self-conscious, or it's something I've heard, or it's guided. Sometimes I think it's almost comes out. It's not part of me, but spiritually guiding me into some of these places, which is fascinating and really, it's always a mystery.
We were talking about this a bit the other night, and I sort of love the idea that even stretching a canvas is really a part of that process for you. A lot of painters don't stretch canvases anymore. They're buying panels. And
it's kind of a Zen thing.
You're a big exception.
It's kind of a meditative. I like being nonverbal. I like that physical part of it, the thinking about it, and and then I let the painting. When I start, the painting starts painting itself. I drip, and I watch. And sometimes I don't feel like watching the drip. Sometimes it's like, come on, I want to get to the next color. But that's part of like building my patience. It's like, okay, I'm giving over control to the work. This was my plan. This is the rule I made when I started the series. So I will spend hours watching the drips, and then eventually, like the world fades away, and I give way to this wonderful place of like nothingness, of like completely losing myself.
It kind of becomes its own thing.
It's wonderful.
Yeah, that is pretty wonderful. When something kind of
But Pat
separates.
Steer was my inspiration. She does those large oil watercolor paintings that are just beautiful and monumental, and that's part of her process, is letting the drip do what the drip does as well.
You said build your patience. Are you naturally not patient? Because the paintings would tend to express otherwise.
I'm human.
Yeah.
I'm human, and the day will work on you. I mean, you hear things over your day in the news, the world, and painting's I'm not saying it's escape. It's a place to dive into what is truly meaningful to me, and where I feel balanced in a really kind of wonderful. I mean, it's not 24. It's not every minute I'm painting. I'm like, but it takes me to an amazing place that is peaceful, and where I can put that down. When I stop painting, my life is still there. There's still, stuff you got to do, and things that have to be dealt with, and weeds in my garden, and things like that.
I'm guessing you don't think much about what time it is when you're doing your painting.
No.
I am the same. I mean, I go to work in my studio 7:30 every morning. I'm never home till 4:30 or so, and that time is just boom. It's like all of a sudden, oh my gosh, I've got to clean up. I've never had that experience. I mean, I liked teaching school, but that wasn't part of it. When the day was over, I was ready to be done, and with almost every job I've ever had. But we're really lucky to have that.
It's interesting too, because we moved here about 7-ish years ago, and I retired when we moved. I tried to get a job locally, and I'm so thankful I didn't, teaching, because then I went full-time into painting. And so I've always been painting as an educator. I always had my studio going, I always had paintings going, but to be able to get up and go, okay, today, I don't have to look at I don't wear a watch. In fact, I just don't have to think about the time.
Is there ever drudgery to finishing a painting?
I wouldn't call it drudgery. It's when I'm finishing, I'm sad to see a painting finish. You probably feel that with some of your sculptures too. Yeah, I mean, I can tell where it's arriving, and then I like a harmonic field, so I will push the edges. And that's probably the only drudge I might have, is like bringing the edges out. Because this one is an earlier painting, and now I wouldn't be as happy with those edges, even though I think they're fine. I like it to be more perfect, not that it could be perfect, but I am striving for something perfect.
You would take this pattern off the edge now?
No, I would probably like tape it, or maybe taped it at some point when I was painting and then take it off. So there's a break. There's kind of a break where your eye just doesn't kind of flitter off. It's kind of like a butterfly flittering off. Yeah. Where I like them to be more now. I don't know how it'll be 5 years from now, even next year. But now, sorry to turn my back to you. I like them to be to the edge. To the edge.
I read a quote from Chuck Close, the guy who does the big faces. And then after his illness, he couldn't paint like that anymore. So they really ended up with a grid-like pattern and really loose paint structure. And with both of those, but especially the earlier paintings, he just talks about the drudgery of painting. But again, look at what he was doing. I mean, he's taking a gridded square and reproducing a photograph. I'd go nuts doing that. Times 400 to get a painting done. So that's such an opposite of what you have to say.
I was admiring the way the light plays on this piece. This is one of your more recent, isn't it?
Really recent.
Yes,
matter of fact,
that's
about
what
2
I
days
thought.
before the show was over, started, I finished it.
And I think why I like it is because of the grid.
Oh, for sure.
And I'd love to see it. I'd love to see it in all different kinds of light, like the morning light. I mean, for me, if I was the sculptor, I'd want to push. Of course, I love series. I want to see a few more of those.
Yeah, there's 2 of them. I think this is the nicer of the 2, but it's also the later, and you always learn some things from earlier pieces.
But you said that thing about Klimt, and you know how he's got all those little pieces?
Yeah.
I couldn't do it, but you could. It would be beautiful.
Yeah,
I touched
know.
my microphone. Sorry about that.
I have a friend who owns a gallery in Mexico, and she always asks her artists whether they prefer the conception part of a work or the production part of a work, or standing back and looking at it when they're done. And she never gets the same answers from people. People are all over the map. I'm guessing that the process is really important for
Absolutely,
you.
the process, yeah. I know I'm making an object, but it's being in the painting.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm literally in the painting.
That's pretty neat, I think.
Yeah.
I especially like the idea of buying a painting of yours and buying a little piece of you.
Oh, well, you would get it.
And
yeah,
I think
you
art
definitely
should do
yeah.
that.
Yeah.
Dennis, what's your answer to that question?
Well, I've asked myself that a number of times. I really like, probably if I had to pick a favorite time, it's when I take that drawing and start working on it. Just when it starts to become tangible. Sometimes by the time I'm done, I just want to be done. You know, if things take, I suppose an average piece in here might be 100 hours. It's just ridiculous. And I'm sure you would say the same. By the time I'm done with that 100, hi Lynn. By the time I'm done with that 100 hours, generally I'm ready to be done. But that, I really like getting a piece off the ground. It's just fun to, all of a sudden it's not a sketch anymore, it's something. And after I move through the first clunky stages, like the piece I was working on today, this morning, I was just sanding little edges. But even sanding edges, you've got to decide, okay, do I want to round that, or do I like that little crisp ridge there? That's fun. I like doing that.
As an educator, you walked your kids through the creative process, I'm sure. So everyone who starts a project, usually, most of my students were really excited about the beginning, but it was the middle where they would, so many times would want to give up, they wanted to quit, they wanted to start over. And I'd have to say, you have to persevere, you just have to trust in your idea, you move through it, it's gonna be good, it's gonna be good, don't give up on this. And they bring it to completion, and again, you see that creative process, and it's just trusting in your idea as an artist, not listening to the periphery of, you know, your great-grandmother, your brother who went to art school or whatever, you know, telling you, oh, you should do it that way. But listen to your creative voice. And I, you know, that's what I try to do. I just listen.
That was really the beautiful part of teaching art.
Yes.
That everybody's solution was their own.
Yeah.
It wasn't, you know,
there wasn't a right
math
answer.
problem.
Right, yes.
that better end up 100.
We were building skills, though. They had to maybe, like, you know, demonstrate color mixing and perspective, and there were elements that they had to nail as far as skills. But
of course.
Then their idea, where they take it, was, yes, always exciting.
Well, the whole skill thing is kind of interesting. Yeah. I mean, your paintings are obviously really skilled. I mean, and hopefully my sculpture is...
I want to touch them because I know they're so smooth.
Yeah, and I've looked at some sculpture and been asked to critique some sculpture that I think the idea is pretty fascinating, but boy, they just come up short on the skill end of pulling it off. Which
technical aspects.
Yeah, maybe that's me more than anything, but it would bother me if I had glue dripping down here.
Or a splinter.
Or a splinter.
Yeah, and I would notice. I mean, I would say to go, why did you fix that?
Yeah, that would drive me nuts. But you know, other people, I think of Peter Volka's pots, they're just, and I don't think that would even occur to him if there was a little goo somewhere. But for me, that would be a big deal.
Do you feel like, as you were both art educators, do you look at your own work through that lens, or have you kind of shed that?
I feel like I'm always a student. Like, even as a teacher, I mean, I taught kindergarten through college, and I always told my students, I'm still learning. I'm still figuring things out. I don't have all the answers. So I think it's feeling like you're in the same creative pond, you know, creating together.
I don't think you ever have the answer. That's the nice thing, which of course makes you a student.
Yeah, absolutely.
I mean, you never
It's
get
a sense
to
of discovery.
I think you're in
always,
trouble as an artist, whether you're a musician or whatever you are. If you have all the answers, you're in trouble. I just think your work is...
Because then you'll just repeat yourself. Then you'll be repetitive, and
Sure.
you know, I could stay safe and just do like one series and do it again and again and again, and oh, she's the artist that does portals. Well, let's get a portal painting, and you know just what you're going to see when you come to the gallery.
Absolutely.
But there's too much, like you were saying, there's just too much and too little time to spend. I could spend yeah, I could do 5 portal paintings, but I don't want to spend that much time on it, so I have the things that are out there waiting for me to discover and explore. So.
Yeah, like I said earlier, we're lucky to be able to do that. I mean, I had a little garden thing that I made a while ago. Oh, it was quite a while ago. It's called A Good Year for Onions, and there was a reference to onions on the top, the way onions, when they come out of the ground. And it just sold. Like, I could have sold 10 of them. And somebody called me 3 years later and said, I saw this piece of yours in, I think it was at Minnetonka, and do you still have it? Because I've just decided I'd like to buy that. 3 years. That's cautious decision making.
I see some onions in this, but I have no idea where, I mean, I have a garden, and so much of your work is organic, but that's very much
well, the
like,
spring is, we gardened, my
yeah,
wife and I, for a long time, and there's nothing better than watching those seeds coming out of the ground.
Let's open it up to questions.
You talked about shipping some of your pieces in parts. Do you send directions on how they're supposed to put it together when they get there?
And also I ship pieces back and forth to Mexico because we spend a lot of time there. So this piece, that was all made in Mexico. So my wife is just the picture of patience when she's got to realize, oh, we got to pack all that stuff. And, you know, it would be a nice, my son's a printmaker, and I envy him being able to just have these nice little envelopes he sends off to people. Sculpture's a pain to move around, and so, sure, you have to tell somebody how to put that, like this big piece floating over you. That all comes apart. That would be a terrible piece to ship, but I could ship it all. All the little rib sections are numbered, and you know, there's 3 screws that hold the whole thing together. So I could do that. It wouldn't be. Another example of that, I sold a piece to Delta Airlines for their lounge out at the airport about a year ago. And I couldn't deliver it. They had to have a museum service deliver it. So, because there's a security issue. So I couldn't come in with some tools and put this thing together. They put it together wrong. It just drives me nuts because I can't get out there. It would take me 15 minutes to fix that piece, and I can't bring a wrench in. So I've just had to let that go, even though I haven't let it go. It just drives me nuts that's there, and it was a piece I really liked, but it's not the way I want it.
Do you ever send a photo?
Excuse me?
Do you ever send a photo?
Oh, I've sent photos. I've talked to the manager. I've talked to airport security. I mean, think about it. They've got a zillion things to worry about, and here's this goofy sculptor coming in saying, I need to move this 4 inches and tighten a bolt. So I just need to let it go.
I've never had anyone hang my paintings upside down, as far as I know, but
No,
they could
but
if they
that's
wanted
right.
to.
I bet that
I mean,
could
once
happen.
they buy them, I mean, if they like it better horizontally or whatever, I have no control on that.
Well, and sometimes it doesn't matter. I mean,
Right.
the concentration camp, well, I don't like referring it to that, but that piece, we didn't know when I brought that. I've had that hang horizontally, and actually when I originally designed it, I sort of had horizontal in mind, but I don't know, Jim, was that you that suggested there was a space there, and we liked the way
I liked the way it worked.
Right, we liked the
Yeah.
juxtaposition to Kathy's paintings, so that's fine. Doesn't matter. Other pieces would bother me, I guess, if they were some other direction, but it works.
I started following you on Instagram shortly before your show here, and I saw processed photos of this piece right here. I believe from drawing to raw wood to finished piece. Not all artists share process. Why do you share process?
That's a really interesting comment and question. I'm not a FaceTime Instagrammer ordinarily, and I don't have any of, it's like, you're not going to find out about my kids and which vacation I took. But I think it's kind of fun to follow someone's process. I would like to see Kathy's painting from beginning to end. And I had people ask me about that, and I thought, well, I could do that on Instagram and start with a sketch. And I think people who follow me tend to comment a lot. And I like that. Sometimes I ask for feedback, but I've had people say, whoa, didn't see that coming.
Mm-hmm. And they like reels too on Instagram. They like you to put reels up. So
for sure.
That's something I'm thinking, well, maybe I should do more of that, showing process and talking to the,
I don't
my
talk,
phone.
I just take pictures. But like you said, I'll usually show a sketch, and you get 10 people maybe who will look at it and say, oh, okay. But a lot of people comment that I kind of like seeing where that's going. And sometimes I'll go off a little bit and then back up because that wasn't working. So I'll have to come back, and I sort of like to share that with people.
Is that from being an educator?
Maybe, If any of you are interested in that, I've got some cards over there, and my Instagram is on. Not that I need a lot of followers.
Ditto, please.
But you're more than welcome to follow and comment and say, oh, that was a big mistake. I'm always happy to hear that.
Well, when we first moved here about 8 years ago, and not long after that, the pandemic hit, and I didn't really know anyone and new to the area, and we weren't going into the city, and so I thought, maybe I'll get on Instagram and visit some of the galleries back east, because we're pretty much mid-Atlantic. I grew up in Maine, and just reach out, and it's been wonderful. It's really been a way to meet people, and I never would have known about Hopkins if I hadn't been diving in and looking at the area. And it's, I think we moved to a really great area.
You did.
It's just fantastic, yeah. And the group, everyone that I've met in the arts and around have just been really supportive and positive. So.
And Hopkins in particular.
Yes, absolutely.
Jim and Lynn are sick of hearing me compliment them on Hopkins, but
not really.
Well, it was actually listening to the art talks, your art talk specifically, that you're questioning with artists, that made me think I really want to try to show at this.
It's an amazing
center.
community.
Yeah.
It really is an
'cause you were
amazing. If people who live here think this happens everywhere,
it does not. No,
not even close.
Does not.
No, this is quite something.
Thank you.
Okay, the troublemaker.
Down, give me 10. I have the good fortune of having started my visual arts endeavors here at Hopkins.
Oh,
I had
good
never
job.
done any visual arts. My first career was in music, but arts, but quite different.
Mm-hmm.
And it's fascinating to me to drop in here and see what happens, and then go to other places and just am amazed that it's so different. And I don't mean that in a good way necessarily.
No, that's for sure.
What's
the
the
truth.
polarity on that, though, Mark? I just.
My question for you is that as I spend more time making art, I am looking at different artists in the way that they create things, and I'm just fascinated with it. I asked questions for a living, that's what I did. Mm-hmm. And so when I look at your work and sculpture in general, your work is fantastic.
Thank you.
And I don't necessarily say that about very many sculptors. It just hasn't really caught my attention.
Thanks.
Where do you keep it all? How do you manage your inventory of pieces?
I've quoted my wife often.
Is the answer
Who
everywhere?
says, do we really need 20 pieces of sculpture in the living room? I'm lucky to have a little compartment next to my studio, which I just use for storage. And the sculpture isn't as big a problem as bases, but I often build bases specifically for pieces just because I like the way it looks. So I don't love that part of the business, but anyway.
So there's just no escaping finding the real estate to do it.
No, so far, I've got a chunk of space attached to my studio. I don't know. I mean, you think about, okay, I'm an old guy, and at some point, somebody's going to get stuck with a lot of work.
That's what I hear.
I mean, yeah. And
I've heard
painters.
this tape,
Oh,
yeah.
I know it. Everybody has. And if you're a Dali or a Miro and you've got enough people interested in building a museum to put your stuff in, you're fine. But I don't have a lot of people calling about that. So I think about that every once in a while. And I mean, my big wish would be to have people own things who like them. So we'll see. I probably sell between a third and a half of what I make, which is fine, but you know, if you've got a lot of pieces, you still have a lot of.
Right. Do you ever
bulky stuff.
recycle the ones that have never sold and are just kind of sitting there? Transform them into something new?
Like Louise Bourgeois used to do that.
Oh, yeah?
Yeah, she tore her early work all apart. And
Yeah, a lot of people I know repainted. I change things sometimes. The Bubblegum Garden, for example, had a much taller base on it when I made it, and I never felt comfortable with that. And maybe a year and a half later, I thought, I got to do something about this. So I tore it apart. Another advantage in having things, you're able to pull them apart.
the materials are expensive.
Yeah, oh, of course.
I have a few canvases, early work going, you know, and some of them are oils, and I'd never do anything over the oils because it's archivally just not correct. But I could gesso over some of my old pieces, really old pieces, and I'm thinking, I don't know, maybe not. Maybe I'll just keep those benchmarks, and everything doesn't have to be up to where it is now. And I think it kind of shows a story of where you've been, and you know, contextually, who knows? I mean, someone may want to write a book about you or do a film about you a decade from now and go, where's his early work? Where's his stuff? Where's his sketches? Oh, we dumped that a long time ago. So, you know, there is something to holding on to that older things. And I go back and I learn. I look at my older things, and there may be a little piece of something in one of those paintings. I'll go, oh, I could go back in
I'm gonna
there.
grab that.
I could maybe grab that and make that one of my rules for one of my series coming along. I'll do that.
No, I think you learn from all of the pieces you do. And
Absolutely.
sometimes things will start, at least with me, and you just sort of hit a dead end. Like I said, I usually have 2, 3, maybe 4 pieces going at once. So if that's the case, I just move on to something else. But I've got a piece sitting in my studio now that I started maybe a year ago. It's 10 minutes off the ground, and I just look at it there every day. And actually this piece, Signs of Spring, those little pieces on the top, I bet I had those for 2 years before I decided what to do with that piece. And I don't even know why I made them. I just liked making these little pieces, but I didn't know where they were going to go. And then eventually it just fell into place. You were talking about music. Mark, is that right?
Yeah.
I just had a composer friend of mine ask me, I have coffee with him once in a while, and we just chat about things like this. And he threw some of his CDs in front of me. He's a pretty classical composer and big-time guy, composes for orchestras all over the world. And he threw these CDs and he said, I'd like you to see if you can... Make a sculpture. Yeah. See if you can take this music and create some sculpture with that. And that was, I mean, my first reaction, I don't usually have trouble coming up with things. I've always got more stuff than I'm ever going to have time to build. But boy, I had to draw and sketch, and everything was just clunky. I thought, I don't know where this is going to go. And then all of a sudden, bloom, and that piece is a result of that. The wall relief is somewhat musical. This piece over here, the other wall relief, I think you can see it, is from that, and I could do a lot more of those. But, oof, it was tough getting off. Oh, you're right.
It does.
But the thing is, every piece of music is different, so it takes you in a different direction. But once that happened, it happened, and
It does make me wonder, in a series, if I weren't listening to Vivaldi and listening to Chopin or jazz, they do influence what I do, because when I'm painting 4, 5, 6 hours, I will literally be going with the rhythm of the music, and I'm just totally into it. And I hadn't really thought about that at any depth about the music. I'm painting the music, or I mean, it's so multi-sensory, really.
yeah. Well, and your brush strokes are pretty calligraphy-like.
They are, yeah. They definitely
So
are,
that,
yeah.
which is about as close
Energized.
to music as one
Energized.
can get. No, but that doesn't surprise me
I'm usually
at
dancing
all.
around the studio,
Yeah.
actually.
That's pretty fun.
Okay, I have a question. All
Yes.
right. I know.
Oh, that's right.
One last question. All right, so I know the most important thing to you is the creativity as opposed to the storage. So I have a suggestion for you. Why don't you make a big sculpture where you can store some of your old pieces?
Or inside.
Like a big
Like a
shadow
Tro-
box.
a Trojan
Big-
horse.
Big shadow box.
Close to your studio.
You know, there's something to be said about size, just related to that comment. I've only done recently one piece for the Four Seasons Hotel downtown. So they wanted this 7-foot piece, and they found a piece at some show and said, you know, can you make that 7 feet tall? That was a pretty fun thing to do. All of a sudden, the engineering changes dramatically, and it had to be outside, so I had to deal with, you know, surfaces that I don't usually deal with. But I put a good solid 2 months into that thing, and it was fine because it was already sold. But, you know, Jim and I have talked about your sculpture program, and I think a lot of those artists, correct me if I'm wrong, will give you a piece for a year and then move it to, I get little notes, Galena, Illinois wants some sculpture and da-da-da-da, and then move it around.
Exactly what
But
they do.
I have trouble storing what I have. What am I
But
gonna
now
do
you
with
have
it?
the experience of making a 7-foot piece of sculpture.
Oh, I love
So
it.
now you can make a bigger piece to put your pieces in.
We got to get some
know what I'm
doors and hinges, but I'll work on that.
All right, I'm going to check back with you.
Thank you.
Dennis, Kathy, thank you so much for sharing your
Our
work
pleasure.
with us.
This was fun. Thank you guys for coming. Oh, nice.
We've been speaking with Dennis Kalow and Kathy Snow Stratton about their exhibition Unexpected Ends, on view now through June 15th, 2024.